Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. If you're someone who seeks meaning in chaos, if you feel the weight of invisible truth stirring in your soul, this story is for you. What happened on that hill 2,000 years ago didn't just split time. It shattered everything we thought we knew about life, death, and what comes after. Today, we're going to walk through a series of supernatural events so profound, so inexplicably real, that they demand your full attention. This is not just history. This is a collision between the physical and the divine, a rupture in the veil that still echoes in every heartbeat of those who dare to believe. The sky darkened unnaturally over Jerusalem. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't a passing shadow. It was as if creation itself had drawn its breath and refused to exhale. People in the streets froze mid-step. Voices fell silent. Merchants looked to the heavens, their hearts pounding against their ribs. Roman guards, hardened men who had seen death in every form, shifted uneasily. They didn't have names for this kind of fear. Something beyond logic was unraveling above them. Something ancient, something divine. It was Friday. A crucified man named Jesus hung bloodied and broken, and with his final breath, the very pulse of the earth changed. He said, "It is finished." But it wasn't an end. It was a rupture. As his head fell forward, a tremor split the silence. The world itself groaned. Darkness fell over the land for 3 full hours. Not a cloud passed, not a whisper of wind, just an oppressive, swallowing black that stretched from the horizon to the tips of men's souls. And every second of that unnatural night burned into the minds of those who watched. The silence was screaming. The air turned to stone. And in that void, hearts cracked open, some in fear, some in awe, but all with the unbearable sense that nothing would ever be the same. They stood below the cross, soldiers, priests, women with broken cries in their throats. Some mocked, some prayed, but no one could explain what was happening. The earth wasn't just mourning, it was bearing witness. Every gasp from Jesus cut through the veil of disbelief. He wasn't like the others. His words weren't curses. They were forgiveness, prophecy, surrender. And then came the moment that felt like eternity collapsed in on itself. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And with that, he gave up his life. But heaven didn't stay silent. Heaven ripped open. In the very heart of the temple, the most sacred ground in all of Judaism, the veil that separated man from God tore from top to bottom. No human hand touched it. No tool could have split it the way it was split. It was divine violence, beautiful and terrifying. The heavy fabric, thick as a hand's breadth, gave way like paper before fire. Priests dropped their instruments. Incense froze in midair. Every ritual, every tradition, every guarded mystery came crashing down in a single thunderous tear. God was no longer hidden. The sacred had just exploded into the ordinary, and no one, no priest, no cynic, could unsee what had just happened. The city trembled, quite literally. As if to underscore the divine fury and holy unveiling, the ground began to shake. Not a subtle quake, not a shiver, but a violent heart-stopping upheaval. Stones cracked, buildings screamed. People fell to their knees, clutching earth that no longer obeyed their rules. Tombs split open in the hills outside the city. Dust spilled from graves long sealed. This wasn't nature. It was judgment, or maybe mercy. It was the Creator roaring into creation, reminding it who held the breath of life. Some screamed, some ran, but those who stayed, who watched, would never again trust silence. The centurion, Rome's iron fist in human flesh, stood frozen. This man had seen countless deaths. He'd commanded executions, watched bodies writhe and beg and die, but never like this. Never with darkness that spoke and earthquakes that grieved. Never with a man who bled compassion even as the world broke him. Something shattered in the centurion's chest. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was certainty. But what came out of his mouth wasn't protocol. It was truth. Surely this man was the Son of God. And in that confession, history shifted. Even Rome couldn't deny what God had made undeniable. And then, from the cracked graves, they came. Slowly, quietly, the saints of old, dead men and women, prophets and priests, the faithful whose names had been whispered for generations. They rose, not as phantoms, not as ghosts, but in flesh and blood. Some limped, some wept. All walked through the city, eyes wide with the fire of eternity. Imagine the horror and wonder of seeing your long-buried mother standing at your door, or your father, decades dead, whispering your name. These weren't legends. These were resurrections. The veil was gone, the tomb was open, and death, for the first time in history, was on the run. In the shadow of the garden tomb, silence had settled like a second skin. The body of Jesus, wrapped in linen and spices, lay in stillness. But above the surface, anxiety stirred. The religious leaders hadn't forgotten his words, his promise to rise on the third day, and fear twisted into strategy. They rushed to Pilate, cloaked in false concern. "Seal the tomb," they demanded, "or his disciples will steal him and claim a miracle." And so, the Roman governor assigned a guard, a handful of trained soldiers to stand watch over a dead man. Irony thickened the air. They sealed a tomb to stop a resurrection they claimed would never come. The guards stood in uneasy formation, their armor gleaming, their eyes scanning shadows. These weren't green recruits. They were war-hardened professionals. And yet, something about that night gnawed at their nerves. The memory of the crucifixion clung to them. The darkness, the earthquake, the voice from the cross. Some of them had heard the centurion's cry. Some had looked into the dying man's eyes. Now, they were told to make sure death stayed dead. But how do you guard a tomb when even the earth won't obey the rules? How do you protect the world from a force that tears veils and splits stones? Then, without warning, it came. A tremor, unlike the one before. A shockwave of holy force. An angel, dazzling like lightning, descended with authority that shattered human logic. The stone, sealed, guarded, immovable, rolled away like a child's toy. The soldiers collapsed, not from battle wounds, but from the unbearable weight of glory. They fell like dead men, eyes wide, breath stolen. When they awoke, the tomb was empty, the seal broken, and the impossible truth echoing in their minds. Fear drove them into the city, where lies were traded for gold, and silence was bought with silver. But what they had seen would haunt them forever. While soldiers lied and priests plotted, a group of women walked toward the tomb, carrying spices, hearts heavy with grief, yet love pushing them forward. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. Women whose names would echo through history not for their strength or status, but for their faith. As they approached, they spoke of practical worries. Who will move the stone? But when they arrived, the stone had already been moved. The entrance yawned open. Their hearts stopped, their breath caught in their throats. And from the shadows, a voice pierced the veil of fear. "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" Inside, an angel waited, not with a sword, but with a message. "He is not here. He has risen." The weight of those words shattered the gravity of despair. The women trembled, overwhelmed. They hadn't come for resurrection. They had come for ritual. Yet they were now witnesses to the most pivotal moment in human history. They were told to go, to speak, to tell the disciples, and Peter, that Jesus was alive. The news pulsed in their veins like fire. Their steps turned from mournful to urgent. Fear still clung to them. Yes, but hope was breaking through like dawn over a graveyard. Mary Magdalene ran, her breath ragged, her soul unraveling. She burst into the room where Peter and John sat in stunned sorrow. "They've taken the Lord," she cried. But her words weren't met with faith. They were met with disbelief. Still, Peter rose, followed by John, and the two raced toward the tomb. The wind tore past their ears, hearts thundering not from exertion, but from the terrible possibility that it might be true, that everything they had feared was a lie, that everything they had hoped was rising. John arrived first, but hesitated. Peter, ever impulsive, entered, and what he saw made the ground shift beneath his certainty. The tomb was empty, but the linens remained. The grave clothes lay in place. The cloth that had wrapped Jesus' face folded neatly aside. This was no robbery, no frantic escape. This was intentional. This was peace. This was power. The two men looked at one another, eyes full of confusion, wonder, and something more dangerous than either, belief. They didn't speak, not yet, but the seed had been planted. Something had happened here that defied reason, defied fear, and demanded their allegiance. And behind them, just outside the tomb, Mary remained. She wept, not from ignorance but from longing. She had loved him deeply, and now she couldn't let go. Not until she saw with her own eyes what her soul already whispered might be true. Through her tears, Mary bent down to look once more into the tomb, driven by desperation, more than hope. But this time, she didn't see emptiness. She saw angels, dressed in white, radiant and still. One sat where Jesus' head had been, the other where his feet had rested. "Why are you crying?" they asked, voices like wind on still water. Her heart ached with a pain too deep for reason. "They have taken my Lord," she whispered, "and I don't know where they've laid him." Then she turned, and everything changed. A man stood behind her. She didn't recognize him, not at first. Grief can blur even the most familiar face. He spoke. "Woman, why are you crying? Whom do you seek?" His tone was gentle, not of a stranger, but of someone who already knew the answer. She assumed he was the gardener, a silent figure among graves. Her voice cracked. "If you have taken him, tell me where he is. I'll bring him back." And then he said it. One word, one name. Mary. Her breath caught. Her soul ignited. It wasn't just the name. It was the voice that had cast out demons, that had calmed storms, that had spoken life into her shattered past. She looked up and saw him, really saw him. "Rabboni," she cried. "Teacher." Her world, once buried, was reborn in that single moment. Jesus told her not to cling to him, not yet. There was still more to be done. "Go," he said. "Tell my brothers I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And so she ran again, this time not from sorrow, but with a fire no force on earth could quench. Mary Magdalene became the first messenger of resurrection, the first to carry the news that death had not won, that hope, once crucified, was now alive, that love had walked out of the grave and called her by name. This was not legend. This was history wrapped in holy awe, and her voice would echo long after the tomb was empty. Meanwhile, on a dusty road toward the village of Emmaus, two disciples walked with heavy steps. Their faces wore the weight of shattered dreams. They spoke of the crucifixion, of the rumors, of the women's testimony, but in their voices was doubt, a slow-burning ache that hope might have been nothing more than illusion. Then a stranger joined them. He asked what they were discussing. They looked at him, stunned. "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who doesn't know what happened?" they asked. And they told him everything. The betrayal, the trial, the death, and how their hearts had been crushed under the weight of unfulfilled expectation. The stranger listened, then replied with sharp kindness. "How foolish you are," he said, "so slow to believe." And then he began to speak, not with vague encouragements, but with scripture. From Moses to the prophets, he connected the dots, revealing how everything had pointed to this moment. Their eyes still didn't recognize him, but their hearts stirred. Something in his words set fire to their bones. When they reached the village, they urged him to stay. And as they broke bread together, it happened. The veil lifted, recognition dawned, and just as suddenly, he vanished. But the absence no longer felt like loss. It felt like purpose. They rose immediately and returned to Jerusalem. The dark had turned to dawn. Back in the city, the disciples gathered in fear behind locked doors. Confusion clung to them. The reports were wild. The tomb was empty. The women swore they saw him. The travelers from Emmaus claimed to have walked and talked with him. But still, doubt warred with hope. Then, without warning, Jesus stood among them. The door had not opened. No sound had announced him. He was simply there. "Peace be with you," he said. Their fear surged. Was it a ghost? But Jesus calmed them not with riddles but with reality. "Look at my hands and feet," he said. "Touch me. A spirit doesn't have flesh and bone as I do." And to seal the moment, he ate in front of them. Their minds could barely contain what their eyes saw. But Jesus didn't stop at proof. He gave them purpose. He opened the scriptures once again, just as he had on the road. And suddenly, it all made sense. Every prophecy, every word of Isaiah, Moses, David, it had all led here. "You are witnesses," he told them. "Now go, preach repentance and forgiveness in my name to all nations, The commission was clear. They were no longer followers in hiding. They were now messengers of the resurrection, bearers of a kingdom no empire could crush. A new age had begun, and they were to carry its fire into the far corners of the world. But one man still held back. Thomas hadn't been there that night. When the others told him, he didn't believe them. "Unless I see the marks in his hands, unless I put my finger where the nails were, I won't believe," he declared. Doubt wasn't a sin. It was a wound still bleeding. And Jesus, in infinite mercy, returned just for him. 8 days later, the doors were locked again. The fear still lingered. And again, Jesus appeared. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he turned directly to Thomas. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Stop doubting and believe." But Thomas didn't need to touch. He fell to his knees. "My Lord and my God." It was the rawest, purest confession of all. And Jesus replied with a promise that reached beyond that room, into your heart and mine. "Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed." Every veil torn, every stone rolled away, every trembling witness points to one unshakable truth. Jesus is alive, and nothing will ever be the same. In the darkest hour, light broke through, not just over Jerusalem, but over every soul willing to believe. This isn't just a story to remember. It's a call to respond. If this message stirred something deep in you, don't leave it behind. Subscribe to the channel, walk with us, and above all, follow Jesus with your whole heart. I'm Oliver, and it's been an honor to walk with you through this sacred ground. Wherever you are, know this: you are seen, you are loved, and your story isn't over. Stay close, we'll see you in the next one.